Since the beginning of human life on Earth, stones have been used to crush or pound wild grains, nuts, and berries. For thousands of years, human and animal power was used in this grinding process. One of the earliest stones used to grind food was the mortar and pestle, a rock with a hole carved out where the raw material was placed, and then a small stone was used to crush or pound the material into a soft pulp. It wasn't until the early 1100s that circular millstones, which were driven by wind and water power, were used to make meal or flour. Early post mills, like the Flour 200 post mill at the Windmill Museum, had two stones placed on top of each other, and the corn or wheat was dropped into a hole in the middle. Wind power spun the upper or runner stone, and the grains were then crushed between the two stones. Wind and water-powered millstones saved an enormous amount of labor. During the medieval ages, anything that was needed in a powdered form could be produced by millstones. Meal for humans and animals, juice from fruits, cork, flint for porcelain plates, phosphorus for fertilizers or gunpowder, paints, cosmetics, and a host of other everyday items were made using the grinding power of the millstones. The production, transportation, and marketing of stones was a large industry. The stones first had to be cut out of a layer of rock and then shaped into the proper size. The average size of a millstone was 4 feet in diameter and 20 inches thick. In Europe, millstones were quarried from 3 popular areas in Germany, France, and Britain. Stones were hand-hewn out of thick layers of millstone grit. Those from France were called French burrs, those from Germany were Cullen or blue stones, and the stones from England were simply millstone grit. In North America, stones were cut from granite as well as a variety of conglomerates including Cocalico and Esopus stones. The stones had to be moved to where they could be sold. Millstones were very heavy objects, with many weighing over 2 tons each. Boats were the preferred method of transportation, since travel by horse and cart was risky, and quite often 8 horses were needed to haul the stones. Once at the dock, large cranes were used to load and unload the stones from ships' hulls. Carts were then used to move the stones to the buyer's location, which was either a watermill or a windmill. When a millstone was delivered, it had not yet been dressed or had the grooves cut. A central eye was pierced and recesses made for the driving rind. The grooves were cut by hand using a millwright or stone dresser's tools, and in many cases, iron rings were shrunk around the outside of the stones to help hold them together. The dressing of a millstone sometimes lasted a week. For stones which ground rye or bark, the grooves were different from stones which ground flour. Stone cutters or dressers made good money as there was a rarity of expert millstone dressers. The millstones were the most expensive items in a windmill. New stones that were 20 inches thick might last 8 years. These stones might be used until the millstone was worn down to 3 inches thick. Once the stones were dressed, simple cranes helped to lift the stones into position inside the mill, and once set, they could begin working. Grinding between 2 stones is first represented by the rotary quern. The runner stone or top stone, which sat on top of the bottom stone or bed stone, was turned by a handle fitted into the eye socket. Grain was poured into the middle hole with the ground meal falling out along the sides. As these stones wore down, small pieces of the stone would always end up in the ground product. Back then, people and animals would have eaten pieces of the stone that were mixed in with the meal. Millstones came in a variety of materials and shapes that determined what they would be used for. For instance, the edge runner has a basin stone made from limestone. The edge runner crushes grain or fruit by rolling over the material. These were usually driven by horses or oxen instead of a mill. Hulling stones were used to remove the husks or hulls from cereal grains. Cocalico stones were hewn from pink and tan pebbly conglomerate. They were monolithic and banded with iron rings. Isapa stones were made from a light gray conglomerate grit from New York State. Granite stones came from along the East Coast. All of these stones were used to hull cereal grains or grind feedstock grains for animals. In many cases, the type of stone material found locally was used for almost any purpose. The furrows ultimately helped determine its final use. When the Flowerdew Post Mill was moved from Virginia to Lubbock, a rare collection of documented millstones that had been kept around the mill were given to the museum and moved with the mill. These stones are now exhibited in the Garrison Family Millstone Room at the American Wind Power Center. The Garrison family has provided the funding for the display and care of the many millstones.